Good evening and welcome to the February 26th City Council meeting. I am going to call this meeting to order, and Mr. McNichol, General Orders.
Well, good evening. We've been working on a special events policy for quite some time, and we have one in draft form before you tonight. Sherry Fletcher is going to give you a presentation on it, our marketing director. All of the values that you see in here are drafts, and the important thing for you to know, though, is that where it shows the cost for a certain city service that the city does, performs, it is the actual cost. It is what it costs us to provide that service. And this has kind of been batted around through the years because we, in the past, have not budgeted for special events. And it has come out of various departmental budgets without a specific line item. We're looking for guidance tonight on what role the city might play and at what cost. And our annual expense for this the last few years has, for those events that are not city sponsored, have totaled somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 a year in total expense.
And that's really added to our budget, but not included in our budget, right?
Well, there's no line item for special events. That's something that I think that we need to do. It has, for instance, if the fire department provided services, it came out of their budget. If the street department erected barricades, it came out of their budget. Because a lot of these things are done either at evening or during non-business hours. So we're looking for, we've worked on the draft for quite some time. We've looked at a lot of other city policies, and we're looking for guidance. So.
Hi, Sherry Fletcher, Marketing and Public Relations. I'm standing in for John McClenny tonight, so this is his project, but I'll do my best to explain it. So as you know, city events, they build a sense of belonging, they improve quality of life, they provide publicity, economic development, all sorts of things. However, there are challenges for city governments, as Mr. McNichol was saying. There are the budget concerns, there's legal concerns. Cities by nature are kind of reactive, and so we also can be inconsistent when it comes to applying rules or guidelines. Of course, there's the issue with the cost recovery. And even though we want to, at the same time, attract and encourage special events. To develop this guideline, John reached out to OSU. If you remember, we had some student groups in here provide some research and their opinions. He's talked to almost every city department to get him feedback on how special events affect them. We've talked to special event organizers. We had one from Oklahoma City actually come in, but he's talked to quite a few others. He's researched other cities. We've talked to Visit Stillwater, and of course the feedback that we've received from you. So the guide I'm going to show you, it's still a draft, but we want to actually show you what it's going to look like to people whenever they actually go to the website. We know there's still legal issues, ordinances, resolutions, all sorts of things that may still need to happen. But what this guide does is limit the city's involvement in special events really to streets, public safety, and utilities. This will allow the city to be consistent and not reactive. So we'll have a coordinator, an official coordinator. We have a cost estimator. We are suggesting a city review meeting as well for larger events. And then we will direct planners to visit Stillwater when appropriate. And then we have a consistent list of contracts and outside services. So let me walk you through this draft website. I think you've got a printout in front of you with it. Like I said, this one's it's live, but it's not really live. So actually, the table of contents that's at the bottom of the page would actually be on the side. And so what we were wanting to show you is that, we'll put it on the website, then people can directly go to the page that they're interested in. And so it's kind of rigged a little bit. But so here would be the special events coordinator. Here's the information, the contact. whenever you need to start with the special event coordinator. There's a page just in general about special events, trying to explain when do you need permits, stuff about signs and right-of-ways, accessibility issues. I have a page here for the planner estimator. This is actually just a flat image. It's not really created, but these are the numbers that Mr. McNichol was referring to. So what this would be, when it's actually live and the numbers are real, would actually be something where you would actually plug in numbers and it would actually add them up, so you would get a total. So it would be definitely more user-friendly than the flat image you see right there. We have a page that includes the application and instructions. The application may end up being an online one. We've got a few things to work through on that. But when you're on pages, they'll all hyperlink back. They'll have hyperlinks within the page. So if you're on this page and you want to know more about the city review, you could click on that and get to it. So we include, how the permit would be, how the process would go, how often, when you would be contacted. So we've tried to include information on there. I think what we're trying to do is if you think you have an event that you need a permit, the first thing is you contact Stephanie, so that Stephanie Kinder. So the event coordinator would be where you start. So some of it we're anticipating really should be a conversation, and she would be able to walk people through, send them back to the web page. If it's a large enough event and they need a review meeting, there's certain things that they need to prepare before they show up to the meeting. And the thought would be at that meeting you would have the right people around the table, so it would just be one meeting, and you would have you could ask your questions. They may tell you need to go back and get more information, or you may need to whatever, so that you would have like the face-to-face with the right people in the room. Let's see. What else do we have here? So, but if you have specific information about street closings, you can click on that page. If you want to know more about insurance requirements, you could go to that page. The utility plan, this has, specific information. We've reiterated we have cost and stuff, so that, when you're on the right page, you can kind of get the right information. I know I kind of went through that quickly. I didn't really answer questions, but let's see, we also have a vendor page. This is some outside information. All of it's not done by the city, but we tried to pull everything together, so if you did have an event and you had these questions, you would have the right information in front of you. The same with the contact page. You don't necessarily have to hire the city to do street closures. We have additional sources that that we've authorized, and we said you could hire this group, and then, like I said, we kind of just wanted to make sure people got to the right place, whether it was taxes or they needed a health permit or something. That's kind of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions or go over a page for you.
I wanted to ask you, while you were just talking about vendors, are we going to recommend certain vendors?
On the street closures?
Or, well...
No, just this is, as far as I think we planned on going, that, like, for the street closers, they would have to have certain requirements, and that we know these are the ones that meet that. But, like, if they wanted to rent chairs, they would just have to go find that themselves.
We have listed those people who are MUTCD, Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, certified in the state, that provide those kinds of services, because we want to ensure that those folks that come in here are going to do it according to those standards for liability reasons, and also not to confuse traffic.
But we would not have a list of caterers and tent vendors or things like that.
Quite hard to do.
Yeah.
We should include everybody. Counselors?
I've got some questions.
Okay,
I do
I'm
too.
just looking at one.
Well, you go. First, I just want to say I appreciate all the time and effort that you guys did in putting this in place. I think I was a little surprised we didn't have one, because I think it really is, if someone wants to have an event, they want to have a clear expectation of what their role is and what the city's role is. So what you guys put together, I think, was fabulous. So thank you for that. Really, the couple things that I had was I had a question about the 30-day time period to find out whether or not your event's going to be approved or denied. Is there a reason? That seems like a long time frame to me. Is there a way to-
Let me look
Maybe
at
there's something
that
missing.
and see if I can remember the.
You have to sign up 90 days in advance, too. I
Yeah.
remember reading that. And then,
Permit application. These are really for those larger events that do require a lot of effort. If you were, let's say you were doing a street party and you did not need city resources and you weren't planning on closing the streets, you wouldn't need a permit. You could go and have your event. So this would be for things that require the city, and the city would need time to do certain things, like if you needed utilities or you needed, some things just take a little bit longer. I know.
Depending on the size and type of event,
Yeah.
it could take 1 week but it wouldn't take longer than 30 days.
I'm going to say yes, but I know that we've looked at a lot of different cities and we've talked to all the departments, and I know John's really done his research here, and so if he has a reason, I know he's put a lot of thought into it.
Well, it's
So-
it's evident. I mean, it's a nice, easy website to navigate.
Yeah, like I said, the links would actually be on the left hand, so it would really be a lot better, but we're kind of cheating tonight.
That's hard when it's not long. The other question I had was, would there be a way to kind of do a checklist? So if I'm going to have an event in Stillwater and I call Stephanie Kinder and explain, could there be a checklist? Because I know in planning events, it would just be nice to be able to visually see what my expectations were up front, and then I could just check it off. I guess what I want to make sure is that if you're planning an event, you know exactly what you need to be doing, and then there's a checks and balances with.
I think that would be presented at the meeting, at the
Okay, so
review
there would be
meeting.
something for
Yeah.
you to kind of follow and-
So the review meeting is really where a lot of that information will come together, and there's some, it kind of depends on if you're not needing electric, then you don't need to worry about electric. If you don't need water, you don't need to worry about water. Maybe all you need is the trash service, perhaps. So I think whenever, the thought is that that's why we want you to start with if you plan on having an event and you don't know if you need a permit or not, is that you start with the event coordinator. And then there's information that would be shared during that in kind of a flow to figure out, you need to be over here, you need to do this, you don't need this. So the thought is that some of this is really, because each event is a little bit unique, it helps to have that initial, it's like we don't want you waiting to the end and then applying,
Surprised
and then you be
about that.
surprised. So we really want you to start with that event coordinator. And so that's why we actually even have several places that initial conversation is actually really important, that you must have it. Then when you get to the review meeting, then at that time, it's like, you don't need this, you probably need this, you've not thought about this. And so they'll go through that check, and that meeting is going to be very efficient, and make sure that everybody, when they walk out of that meeting, and they may have to have 2 or 3 before they get ready, but that's where all that will go down.
And I think that the last question I had was, I guess, do we know a load of, Stephanie Kinder, is this going to increase, how many events do we have people calling about and having come to fruition? That is this going to increase her workload? Is this going to be a feasible thing for one person to help coordinate?
Well, we've certainly talked to her about it, and I think so.
Okay.
And we can monitor her workload activity. There are some things that would not be done by her, homecoming, walk around. Some of those are done by a different community or committee, so a committee of a lot of people. So not absolutely every event would be hers, but
Well, I really see it as a great way to foster city, visit Stillwater, special, I think there's a great way to link all of that communication to have those events be successful, not only for the city, which we should, not be doing it for free and getting, some of that taken care of, but then also just having a really succinct way to put on events, so nicely done.
well, that is one of the areas that we hope to get guidance. Obviously there's an economic development side to this, but bear in mind that an event to recover just $3,500, an event's going to have to generate $100,000 in spending. So we need a method, I guess, to determine that impact prior to the event. If we're going to put it on some percentage figure, or this is a lot tougher thing than you think when you start looking at all of the aspects of a special event.
And I think a lot of times someone can have a great idea for an event, but I think when you really think through what it takes to put a small event on up to a large event, there's a lot of factors that take place that sometimes you don't think about until you're in the middle of planning that event. And so I think this will help, hopefully, provide some guidance, and then also is a little bit more realistic expectation of, oh my gosh, I'm planning this event, here's what could happen down the line, which I think is what's needed. And there's no surprises on the person planning the event side, and hopefully there's not that many surprises on the city side as far as what needs to happen.
One of the reasons we suggest at least a 60-day lead time is that, for instance, if you're planning to have something as simple as beer sales, navigating through those licenses is a time-consuming process because you need a state and a county and a
That's right.
local license, and they come in order.
Yes, they do.
And there are court dates and hearings and all kinds of things that go with it. So,
Well, I also think it allows someone to maybe plan their event a little bit, it gives them some guidance too,
right.
how to do that.
Vice Mayor, I'll just go down the row.
Okay, well, I think Elaine must be much more technically savvy than I am, because I found it kind of balky.
It will, I do think whenever the links are on the other side, it'll be a little bit easier to go back and forth.
Well, back and forth is one thing, and having one straight narrative that just goes, I look at everything on my phone and just scroll all the way down, and you don't have to go back and forth. So that was a little bit, I'm just not that savvy. But I was looking at this application, trying with the mindset that I was going to have an event, and right from the front page, I thought, I don't think you guys really want to have events. It's kind of negative. And just a few, like the very first page, special events guide, if it said, it does say, special events help build a sense of belonging, community pride. That paragraph should, I think, say your event should be, your application should be in 90 days ahead of time, so you see it right away. But the language could be, we really want to help you have a successful and safe event. And in order to do that, there are many details that need to be taken care of, so 90 days ahead.
Okay.
Just that kind of, why are we doing this? We're not doing this to make sure you don't put any signs up and you don't do this and you can't do that. It's to make safe, fun events in Stillwater. So to try to communicate a little bit of that more friendliness.
We can do that.
Actually. I'm glad you said that the links would be in the text.
Yeah,
For
there,
vendors and, especially on that vendors and food alcohol page.
and part of the
Every
reason of not having it in one big, long page is that people need different things, or they may not need, and then this allows them just to get to the pages that they need.
And I guess I'm thinking that if the very first thing you do is see the event coordinator, that when you're just looking at the application, and it's easy to follow, you intuitively can sense that this is a process that's going to flow.
Yes.
Not necessarily, and then you will go to the event coordinator and find out if you need to do all this other stuff. But just if it's uncomfortable to just read through the thing, go back and forth, it makes it feel like this whole process is going to be back and forth. I might have missed it, but I if I'm planning a 50-person event, and I looked at this and I saw that the water meter deposit was $1,200, I'd be like, well, forget that. Is there a place right up front that says, you know, there are big events and there are small events?
It's a good idea.
I mean, and those are certainly subjective words, so, you know, something under 50 people is a small event, or you're not going to close a street, or you're not going to have alcohol.
I think we probably had something a little bit longer at one point, and then I think it's been edited down. But we do have, is that this really is only for events that require permits. So,
But we don't, but a layperson just looking at it doesn't
Well,
know if I require,
it says whether or not it's from, if you're going to have an event that requires street closings or use of city services, including barricades or trash service, then you will have to go through this event. If you're not closing a street or you don't need city services, then you don't have to go through this.
maybe just that line.
Right.
Yeah, I can.
agree.
I think it probably got edited out, but I think we have that verbiage somewhere. So we can add that back.
Which is really, you know, that very first thing that you open up should have, I think, the important information. Apply between 1 year and 90 days. See the event coordinator first, and you don't have to bother with this if you're not doing any of these other things.
Okay.
And just, you know, we're really trying to help you have a good event.
Sherry, what you were talking about is under general information about special events. It's one of the first ones, and it does open up with many event activities and structures may require permits. Maybe if we could just, right there, somehow
Yeah.
say, if you,
Yeah,
easier.
we probably have the verbiage somewhere. We can go back and edit some of that back in. Yes.
I just, and again, I will say this too many times, but the first page you look at should have really crucial information, because it doesn't, you know, it doesn't say 90 days. Well, it does, I think it's on the 5th link where it talks about the 90 days. And I absolutely agree with Elaine, though, on the checklist. And I actually gave John the Tulsa, City of Tulsa application, which is pretty lengthy, but it has a checklist.
Okay.
And I think that, you know, myself thinking about trying to organize something, even before I see the event coordinator, if I can see the checklist of all the things that I need to do just in a list, I can go, okay, well, this looks organized.
Okay.
I'm working with an organized organization,
Yes.
and it's straightforward.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay. Counselor Joyce?
Thank you. Thank you, Sherry, for being here and presenting. I know this is not your project, so I'll give you comments, ask you questions.
Thank you.
So I agree with a couple of things excuse me, that have been said. One, I do think this website should be very encouraging to people who are trying to plan events. We want, you know, whether it's pictures of other events happening or, you know, text that talks about this is good for Stillwater. We like, you know,
Thanks
we
for
want to
wanting
help
to
this
hold your
happen.
event.
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks.
Thank you
Yeah,
for
thanks for choosing
planning an event
Stillwater.
here.
How can we help you?
Yes. So the more positive, the better on just that splash page when you open it up. A checklist of some kind, I think, would be great, as would a timeline of some kind where you can kind of say, okay, 90 days out, you need to think about liquor license. 90 days out, you know, you need to you need to call the event coordinator. But as we've been talking, I'm thinking, you know, if this is an interactive website, and we can do lots of cool stuff with websites, where we've got on the back of the application, there's this check all that apply, you know, alcohol sales, food sales, you know, where you're checking that off on this application. It seems to me that from a web standpoint, putting up a little box, just like we want to do with the interactive fee page,
Right.
where you can say, when do you want to have your date, you know, more than 50 people, less than 50 people, alcohol sales, and check those boxes, and then actually get a pop-up that says, okay, here's when you're going to have to, you want to do this April 1st? You got to apply by X. You know, I mean, those are fairly simple. There's not a lot of back and forth over if you're going to sell alcohol on April 1st, you've got to apply by, whatever the date is. So that information, if I could go to that first page and say, I want to plan an event in Stillwater, and click some boxes and fill in some information and get a customized timeline and checklist of all the stuff I'm going to need for that event, that would be a really great use of a website and web technology where we can actually provide that information pretty quickly and easily to people. But again, even if it can't be that fully interactive, some sort of a timeline, if you're serving alcohol, here's where you're going to have to start and all that sort of stuff. So people can early on in the process see that whole kind of thing laid out. On the reports or plans, like the event site plan, the traffic control plan, waste plan, that sort of thing, I don't know if we can have forms for that available for people to fill out. I know they're all going to be very different because they're going to be in different locations, but maybe even if we just had examples of what one of these looks like, because I felt like when I was going through here and it said, okay, you're going to have to get a fire lane plan and a first aid station plan, I'd be kind of like...
That would be when Stephanie has that initial conversation.
Okay.
So I know that they do have those. I can't answer as to why we didn't include them on this site.
Okay.
But I know that there are some examples, and I think the thought is that we really want people to start with the event coordinator and not plan it on their own.
Yeah.
So that there's certain things that we really want to have in that conversation. So in that initial conversation where she's like, are you wanting alcohol? Well, here's some stuff you need to know. If you need fire, here's some things you need to know, so that they're not going through and saying, oh, I can plan this all without discussing, I've got it figured out now. So, but I do think Stephanie has a lot of
Okay.
that stuff.
Well, I think that's good. I think the more we can use Stephanie as the coordinator to do some of this and walk people through that, I think that's great. I honestly think that we should not put that detail on the website then if Stephanie's going to be dealing with
Yeah.
it, because then just going through the website and you're seeing all this planning and all these things I'm going to have to do, and I don't really know what it's going to be. I would rather we say, if you did that interactive thing at the beginning and it says you're going to need a special events permit, and it says you're going to work with Stephanie and she's going to help you with, X, Y, and Z, and that's it, and
Yeah.
not give them all that extra information on the web so that then they're trying to figure out, I don't know what that means, I don't know
Right,
what a
yeah.
fire plan is. If we're going to have them do it through Stephanie, then we should just tell them, you'll work with your event coordinator to get all the planning done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so my next thing is on the review meeting. The
Yes.
city review meeting, and I know, if they're going to be working with Stephanie, that's going to be great. My concern is there, and having talked to some folks who have planned events in the city and dealt with the city review meetings, there's a lot of people in the room. Sometimes there's some back and forth over what needs to happen, and there's changes. We say, okay, well, if we do what the fire department's asking us to do, then we've got to change this plan, and then that changes our electrical plan, and maybe it's not possible, but I would love if the city did that review meeting internally owned and said, once Stephanie's got the plans together from the coordinator or from the planner, goes and says, okay, everybody, staff, let's all talk about this, let's figure it out, and then Stephanie takes whatever the upshot is back to the person, rather than having that person sit in the room with 10 or 15 or 20 people from the city who are all, kind of
figure it out.
trying to figure it out, like that we do that on our own.
That's a little detail I'm not quite sure about, whether or not they have a preliminary meeting before they bring that person in.
Okay.
I can't answer that.
Well, so my suggestion or my comment at this point would just be, can we keep the event applicant out of that process to the extent possible, and let Sherry
and
be
they-
their rep,
yeah.
or not Sherry, I'm sorry, let Stephanie be their rep, and kind of get the city folks to all get on one page, so that when the person hears back from the city, they hear one answer from the city,
Yeah.
and they don't hear,
And it may be set up like that.
okay. that's
I
fine.
don't know, but I'll make sure that John hears.
Yeah, so yeah, trying to just get one city position back to the planner rather than having them get everything. Second to last thing, is there an internal companion to this so that we have an internal policy that Stephanie's going to follow, that, if Stephanie is not here anymore, somebody else is going to be able to walk through and say, okay, here's how we do this from an internal perspective. When somebody turns this in, here's the,
Leave that to you.
and that, so, again, instead of asking you questions, I think we need an internal, some sort of internal.
Well, you're talking to
companion
John.
policy.
He'll watch this, so
Yeah.
you're really talking to
John.
him.
Yeah, you are talking to John. He will watch
What are we
this.
looking at?
And the short answer is no, we do not.
I think it would be helpful to have some kind of companion policy internally so that when this stuff gets turned in externally, then everybody from the city, somebody else could step in and say, okay, here's the steps we follow once we get the plan. Okay, so last one.
Well, there is a smaller events planning group that meets regularly, and they meet with Stephanie and discuss a lot of this. So I think we've got something kind of set up. It's just, I don't know that everything's written down.
Sure. Actually, I think that's the last thing. The only, last comment I'd written down was that I think, yes, absolutely, we need a special events budget line item. That the city is, treats this as an investment, as a function of the city. That part of our budget and a part of our expenses is to make sure that city events are planned well, that they go successfully, that we're encouraging that kind of activity to happen. Because I agree, Norman, that if we're just looking at sales tax generated versus cost of the city, there's not necessarily going to be that many of them that really break even on. But if you just look at some of the events that we've had recently, and the bike race is coming up, so it's a good example. But national magazine stories and media stories around the state. That's some of that stuff is we can't really put a price tag on it. And I know
also
you.
think word spreads. If events go well here
Yeah.
and it's an easier process and
Yeah,
it makes
absolutely.
sense, I think it attracts more.
Yep.
And I think that speaks volumes too to having more happen.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
Well, I'll leave
So Wedlake,
All right. So I won't repeat any of that. Some of my notes have already been commented on, but just two, maybe three extra things. So going back to Vice Mayor's comments about kind of the clunkiness right now, I know this is not in its final form. And in fact, there appears to be a fair amount of verbiage that's been left out under some of these subheadings, like general information about special events. There's a lot of things that were in the draft that didn't make it their way into the final website. I don't know if that's just because it's not finished yet or what, but there were some things in the draft that kind of outlined, for example, the uniform code of.
MUTCD.
Hey, thank you, sir.
But
But some things in there that helped explain a little bit better. This is pretty bare bones right now, and like I said, I understand it's not in its final form, but going back to those comments, I think that something really easy to do to put on here is just to put a PDF file of this as well, so that you can go through the website and do all this stuff, but also, just a printable file you can put in there to print out and say, okay, this, I can carry this with me all the time. Going back to the comments about application, so a form field application, I think, is something that would be very easy to do, that you could just put in right there online without having to print stuff out and then
Right.
bring it in. Again, pretty simple thing to do. And then third, as I was sitting here listening to some of these comments, so another easy thing that I think would be worth implementing would be a calendar as well of these special events, so that when you go to this website and you're planning these things, you can see what special events have already been planned, what permits have been issued, just on a simple calendar. Because that may, for large events, it's probably not going to make a huge amount of difference, but for smaller events that are easily maneuverable or a little bit more malleable, that may, change your management, so to speak. So I think a calendar with the previously granted permits or permits that are in the works, or you could even have that status on the calendar as well. Permit in progress, permit has been issued, whatever, would be something that'd be helpful to people that are navigating this process. So the rest of my stuff's really been talked about already, so I won't belabor anybody else with that. So.
and you took the rest of mine. So actually, I did have one more. Contact numbers. I know you have them back there, but they're separate. They're at the back. And I think that you list departments or you list certain things. And I think maybe the phone numbers could go right there. The contact numbers could go right next to that. Makes it a little bit easier. And application ease, which I think Counselor Wedlick just said that. And friendlier, inviting, positive language. Not that, I think this is great, and it's so much better than what we had, and I appreciate everybody that worked on this. But there's always just better ways to say things. Whoever edits themselves knows that. So I think saying, what can we do for you? How can we help you? We want you here, and we want to work with you. Let's become the city everybody wants to come to work with. And it starts with how people see us. So that's all I have to say. Anybody else? Mr. McNichol?
To bring you a final draft, we need to talk about cost recovery and how that might work. We have presented you with what it does cost for those items, and we need some idea of whether there should be cost recovery depending on the event. Again, obviously, there are some events where the city's a co-sponsor, and those homecoming, walk around, we just provide.
Well, I'll put my 2 cents in here. I think if the fire department has to take money from their budget that's for the year, yes, we need to recover that cost. If police, I definitely think that if it just comes out of other people's budgets, I understand we're going to try to do a line item ourselves, but I do believe cost recovery would be important. I think that this is a quality of life issue as well, where you don't always have to recover the cost, but it has to be good business for everybody. And good business for everybody is watching taxpayer dollars.
I like the idea of recovering the costs. I also wonder, I mean, I can't add this up. You know, a one-day event could be thousands of dollars for an event. And I don't want us to get into the same position that we have on other decisions that eliminate small activities.
Right, and in looking at this, it gets really difficult because I was given information by a person the other day that the jazz festival that's thinking about coming, or blues festival that's thinking about coming back, wanted to have it outside, and there would have been an additional $8,000 cost to do that. I don't know where they got this number because this is not yet in place, and perhaps someone in the city gave them that number. But when you look at it, just gets real difficult because do you do it on a percentage basis? Do you try to predict into the future on how many people this is going to bring to town, what kind of revenue comes, or do you do it solely on the body count that you think is going to be here? It's
really tough.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, yes, it's prohibitive probably to a whole lot of people.
So,
and if it's a profit-making venture, do we participate at all?
my question about money is, so if you said, even if that number, $8,000 for the jazz festival is not, it's difficult for me to figure out where a cost like that would come from. Is it mainly out of the street closings at $500 per block per day? Is it the cost of the electricity service? Or, I mean, I guess $900 for temporary electric setup is a big chunk of that. But
well, in that location, it's already there.
Yeah.
I mean, we have service there, and I don't know where the number came from. I truly don't. I don't know about the accuracy of the number.
So in events now,
But I think that there is an intent to sell alcohol, and if that's the case, then they do have to have some security presence at, what is it, $75 an hour?
It just says $75 per employee per hour.
Well, I mean, I'll throw my 2 cents in on this real quick, and I think that to make a policy based on what you think is what kind of traffic you're gonna generate, et cetera, is setting up for failure. I mean, I've never met anybody that can predict the future with any degree of accuracy. So I would be a staunch no on that policy. I do believe that cost recovery is something that we need to look into. I would be against looking at 100% cost recovery, but in the interest of simplicity right now, my my vote would be to do a percentage recovery at picking numbers out of the air, 50%. When you look at cities across Oklahoma, as we've discussed before, the cost recoveries are all over the board. There's 0%, not many, mind you, and then there's all the way up to 100%. So if we're getting into these waters, to me, the logical place to start would be right in the middle, at a 50% cost recovery. That's even across the board. It keeps things simple. You don't show favoritism based on size or what you think is going to bring in or what the bed tax is going to garner, whatever. It's the same for everybody.
And that would be from a nonprofit organization to a profit organization throughout that spectrum?
I'm thinking a little bit further than that. I like the idea of some cost recovery, but I think there's a difference between an event that's going to generate its own funds and an event that is just trying to promote community awareness. And so maybe the cost recovery for that is 25% and one that's making, I like the percentage idea also, but I do think there is a difference between one that's going to be multiple days and generate money and one that's just trying to have an event to help,
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's part of, I don't know how if they define that when they're describing what their event is going to be, or if there's definitions we come up with for that. I don't, but I do like the idea of percentage.
It wouldn't, the line wouldn't be on for-profit or not-for-profit?
Okay, yeah.
I think it would need to be. Has to be. So in the past, we haven't had a budget for any of this. Have we recovered about 50%? 40%?
Probably not. We've recovered some smaller percentage of that, vastly smaller percentage of that. It truly depended on the size of the event and how taxing it was on our resources, because at some point, people think for either police or fire coverage that it's a simple matter because we have all those stations and all those people, and they forget it's 24-hour, 7-day a week, 365-day a year operation, and people have days off and vacation, and you have to have people fresh for the next shift and all of these things, and sometimes they're just not available. Same holds true with our barricade crew. If we have a lot of traffic projects in town and someone wants to hold an event at the same time, they have to go rent barricades to make it happen. So in those cases, certainly we're going to pass that around. So it has...
Wouldn't just have it on a street that's already closed?
Mr. Norman would have a fit. So
That's where the calendar comes in.
Yeah.
What's the most expensive event we've ever, what's the most we've ever charged somebody to hold an event?
if memory serves, I think it was $3,000 or $4,000.
I mean, if we actually charged for things like walk around at homecoming, I assume those would be astronomically higher, right?
Yes, it would be in the tens of thousands, yes.
I do think that those, you mentioned earlier that those were separate committees. I think they should go through this application process.
Oh, they do.
also, and we should know what the cost is, so that we can say,
Oh, I can tell you what the cost is.
okay, well, I think we should know, according to the same cost as any other event, how much that costs.
And I think that's what's tough about the whole flat percentage recovery, just because there are some events we are definitely going to treat differently. Those two being, I think, easy to point out, but even football game days, I think, would be events in the sense that there are city resources being put into those. Yeah. I have to kind of go, we're going to have a percentage recovery, I mean, I think we need to have set fees, and I think maybe instead of saying we're going to recover a certain percentage up front, we say, here's the standard fees. We think that's going to, I mean, are these numbers that are in here now, are those based on,
Those are actual numbers.
those are, so that would be 100% recovery?
That would be 100% recovery.
Maybe we set them at 50% or whatever, some number, maybe we set them at 100, and we say there's, there's a possibility of getting a fee waiver, there's a possibility of getting a rebate, there's a possibility of something like that if you can show either how many room nights you brought in with your event, or how much sales tax you generated, or something like that, where we have a standard rate. We're going to charge everybody the same rates, but then there's a fee waiver for a nonprofit that is doing a non-profit generating event, or there's a fee waiver for someone who is generating particularly large amounts of commerce, or there's, something along those lines instead. So then there is a more individualized approach to each one of them, because they're going to bring in different levels of usefulness, I guess, or levels of economic benefit to the city, and we can approach them individually rather than just having a flat approach. So it would start with a 50% upfront, and then say, well, we may be able to give you some of it back, or we may be able to discount some of this if you can show
Well, and
X,
then,
Y, and Z.
then you kind of raise the question too, of if the city wants to charge their own flat fee of 50% cost recovery, there's party grants out there. I mean, in fact, Visit Stillwater has, the possibility of grants, and, based on whatever algorithm they use for calculating bed tax and things like that, the city could say, ours is 50%, period. And then if there's some, tax generation in this event, then you can get third from other entities.
Well, and we make that direction to Visit Stillwater.
But I also think it's helpful, and this is like, again, from someone who does events, to plan, you're planning an event, so part of it is there's a cost to putting on an event. And so I think that this does help provide that upfront cost, and if there's a way to, I know we need to recoup some of it, but I also think it's a way to help with planning also. So there aren't surprises. There aren't, I had no idea I had to pay for electric hookup, or I had no
Sure.
idea that I had to pay for police.
Yeah.
Mr. McNichol, does this help?
Clear as mud.
We will wander around and see if we can reach a happy conclusion when we bring you a final product.
Is it that we're truly trying to get 100% recovery? Are we trying to have events be easier to put on in the Stillwater community that provide, I think it's a little bit of both. So maybe it's about a 25% recovery. When we start talking about trying to give a waiver or that, it becomes very subjective again, and it's who you know or who you don't know. And I guess I'm from the mindset of for these types of things, I think it should be pretty clear up front. And maybe we start it at 25% to at least recoup some of that cost back, and then things grow, then you change the percentage.
You could see if, the first year
Well, we could revisit
costs
the issue, certainly.
$250,000 and we recoup $25,000, and we would rather have $125,000, we change.
If
what
you're
we're
saying
doing.
the average
Well, if we're
price-
too efficient, they'll grow. The number of events.
Good.
Yeah.
But then
Makes it
I'd
better.
rather go that way than set us up for failure on that.
And that might be the way to do it, is to start with a lower fee and revisit the situation after a year. And I think that there's a possibility that we could learn some things along the way.
I think it would be helpful to put the real unit cost,
Sure.
and then 2019, 25%, whatever, preliminary. testing.
Well, at the top of that page, we could put you will be charged 25% of these fees.
That way they'll know upfront what that.
Right.
And we know, as a city then too, how much is.
With actual dollars in there too, instead of
Right.
just putting 25% for
Yeah.
the math impaired like me.
Yeah,
Oh,
that would be
okay.
me as well. I
Yeah.
know the exact number.
25% of 500.
Cup fingers.
Okay. I guess that moves us to request for executive session. Mr. Dorman.
A number of items tonight, unfortunately. Request an executive session pursuant to 25 OS subsection 307B4 for the purpose of confidential communication regarding potential litigation involving C Group, Inc. and pending litigation styled Mitchell versus City of Stillwater, case number CJ 2017-242, District Court of Payne County, Oklahoma. It is my opinion that public disclosure of these matters will seriously impair the ability of the city to defend this pending litigation or in the public interest. Secondarily, I'd ask for executive session pursuant to 25 OS subsection 307B3 for the purpose of confidential communication regarding the purchase or appraisal of real property.
Okay, and before we adjourn, Mr. McNichol.
I would just like the public to know that there are two hearings scheduled in the near future on March the 5th and March the 6th that deal with the 12th Avenue Overlay District, and I want everyone to know that those meetings will not take place. Whatever formal city attorney's office decides that needs to come off the agenda, it will. About a week ago, a little over a week ago, I had a meeting with the neighborhood group that approached about that original concept, and following a lengthy discussion, they asked that no further action be taken on that so that they can get with development services, look at the text amendments that were applied, and they would then concentrate on the original study area. And at this time, it is my understanding that that expanded area will not be included. Further, my understanding that somewhere in the vicinity of 90 days, when those text amendments are completed and developed, that a ballot, if you will, would be sent by the neighborhood group to each homeowner that lives in the original study area to determine their interest in being involved. And once that is complete, the city would have to renotice any area that was, because of the 90-day lapse in time, would have to renotice any area that was. The important message is that if you were planning to come to a hearing on either March 5th or 6th, that will not take place. Thank you.
Okay, so is there a motion to move into executive session?
Move to move into executive session?
Second?
We have what am I trying to say? We have a first and a second. Please vote. And with a vote of 5-0, we are now moving into executive session.